My name's Jeff Morgan, and I'm here once again with Dr. David O'Connor.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you once again for letting me stay at your house. I mean, I've been in Austin twice now in the last 2 weeks, and I'm going to be here again next week, but I'm not staying overnight next time.
All right.
But I want to just thank you once again for allowing me to stay at your place, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you, and every time we've talked, I've learned something more.
Likewise, thank you.
Well, thank you. But I mean, obviously, because you're a professional, 27 years of experience in your field. But let me ask you, as a professional, what type of rules and regulations govern you? Do you want to start there? Or do you want to go something else?
No, I think that's a very fair question. So, for example, as a board-certified adult and child and adolescent psychiatrist, there are several governing bodies that will serve as guidelines. Certainly, one of the main ones is the Texas State Board of Medical Examiners.
Okay.
And within those guidelines, or I should say guided, those guidelines are guided by other guidelines.
Okay, right. The committee that oversees the committee that oversees the committee that oversees.
Yeah, one of the important guidelines would be the Texas Administrative Code.
Okay.
And also the Texas Occupations Code.
Okay.
But then you have the other professional guidelines, such as the American Psychiatric Association, and even the American Psychological Association, relating to issues of the practicalities of practicing in different environments, and the issues of ethical guidelines are really important too. Also, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry serves as another guideline in terms of ethical guidelines, logistics of practice, and even just practice guidelines in themselves.
And do they ever conflict with each other?
Not that I've run across, but as you mentioned earlier, when you're practicing for so long, I think one of two things can happen, or a combination at some point in time. At first, when you come out of your training and you're new and you're fresh, you're very guideline oriented, because it's recently freshly been ingrained in you.
Right.
And hopefully you've had good mentoring, good supervisors that have helped make you aware of these things. And I think, as with many professions, as you go along and you're learning the real practicalities, feet on the ground of practicing in a certain area, sometimes the updating of your knowledge base can fall behind. And so you kind of fall into this maybe cultural practice style, that might not always, or just kind of smooth the edges off of what the stiff guidelines are. And then hopefully the practitioner realizes, well, maybe this isn't the standard of care. I need to go back and refresh and keep educating myself myself.
Do you have continuing education then that you must take? Is that prescribed for you?
Oh yeah, all the time.
And tell me, what is that like? Is that so many hours a year, or?
Well, Texas, every state has their minimum guidelines, but really, I think the practitioner relies on themselves to keep up to date on the number of hours. And sometimes you keep doing it, and you just forget about the minimum number of hours. You just keep track of them, and you can be, for myself, a lot of times it's like a couple of hundred a year of CME hours I do in different formats, whether it's a conference or just online. But it keeps you up to date on what the standards are in your practice. The standards include what your colleagues are doing, as well as what the Texas Administrative Code or your licensing board requires too.
So with regard to what you've just talked about with your own education and ongoing education and everything, what's your experience with child custody evaluators? Are they, maybe you don't have enough background to know, but have you seen anything with child custody evaluators that indicate that they're adhering to these guidelines? Anything along those lines that you want to mention?
Well, I think the first thing is that for over a quarter of a century, I've practiced child and adolescent psychiatry and adult psychiatry.
A quarter of a century is a long time.
It is. And so in doing that, you have certain standards and knowledge about what the needs are of children and adults, so that, but children growing up with the best outcomes as possible. And I think in my own personal experience of having a child out of wedlock and then encountering the family court system, that really got me involved into what is going awry in the family court system. And that what I've experienced in terms of, in Texas, the standard possession order or the expanded standard possession order is not what's going to lead to the best outcomes of children.
And we actually mentioned that a little bit last time, that whether, even the people that made the standard possession order and stuff like that, if they were qualified to even make that judgment, it almost seemed like to be anti what the theory is, or not the theory, but what to be the case.
It's very contrary to the science. And so I think that through these experiences, that's really put me, I guess, as an advocate, not necessarily defined as an advocate against the family court system, but an advocate that's contrary to what's going on in the family court system. Because
and an expert advocate, may I add.
I'm considered an expert in my field. I don't advertise myself as an expert in forensics, but throughout my career I've practiced forensics in juvenile justice centers and adult justice centers on a continuing basis. So through that, I've always been exposed to the psychiatry. So because of the contrast that I've experienced between what I've been trained to do, what I've dedicated my life to, and what I'm seeing going on in family court, I guess it's made me quite a strong advocate, contrary to the family court system. Now, what I've experienced, with a child custody evaluator has been shocking. And I would say without any guiding principle and without any guidelines, such as from the Texas Administrative Code, Texas Family Code, Texas Rules for Psychologists, what I experienced in the report that I received, and which was evaluated by several others, was that there was really no guidelines followed, and it was essentially a character assassination. Right. Such that, the main points were that, I think we mentioned this earlier, was that there was several multitude of statements that were just frank false statements, and that could not be substantiated by any factual basis or clear data. The other thing encountering was basically fabrication of statements, which had no documentation to support them, but which in fact, I think, increased the potential conflict of one parent against another. And I think the other thing is, when reviewing the Texas Administrative Code, the Texas Rules of Psychologists, the Texas Family Code, there was non-compliance with all these codes. And one of the very important things about the Texas Family Code is that it's stated that child custody evaluators must follow best practice techniques. They must substantiate their opinions by appropriate documentation, testing results, which certainly did not occur. And I have all that documentation, all that evidence.